Okay, we're here with Rob Rader from the College Board. Rob, thanks so much for being here. Why don't you tell us about why you're running for re-election?
Sure. Um, I'm the first in my family to go straight through college. My mom had attended Michigan State but dropped out to have me. My dad dropped out of Eastern Michigan in Ypsilanti, and my mom ultimately returned to college when I was in elementary school and got a teaching degree from Florida International University. But they worked hard their whole lives to make sure that they could give me a bigger educational horizon. And that made a huge difference for me in my life. And I've wanted to make sure that those same opportunities were available to other people and to our students at Santa Monica College. Now that I'm a father, and I started realizing since the last election, my kids have probably taken not quite 10 classes at Santa Monica College, but they've taken more than five. So it's somewhere in that range, around eight classes, seven, eight. My son Dashiell has taken a number of the guitar classes, um, the entire, I think, guitar progression. And they've both taken academic classes as well to prepare both in high school and for college. Education is something that I believe strongly in, that it makes better people, it makes better citizens, it improves people's um, life opportunities, and I'm very proud to be part of it. That's really why I'm involved. I think it's very important, and I think it's more important than just saying, well, it leads to good jobs. It does lead to good jobs, but it leads to better people as well. I'll stop there because I could talk a lot more on this, and I don't want Michael Soloff to get mad at me ever.
Okay, so I wanted to start by asking you on your questionnaire, you mentioned in response to the issue of on-campus protest and student activism. You mentioned that there were two events this past week and one event the prior week that you saw as textbook examples of how to plan for these types of issues. So, just for context, since someone might be watching this video months from now, can you just tell us what those specific events were that you're referring to?
And I might have them slightly out of order. One of them was more somewhat wasn't quite spontaneous, but happened like with 1 day's notice, and that was the one 2 weeks ago. So they did plan for it, and there were no disturbances that I'm aware of. But the two that we really had an opportunity to plan for was they had a speaker come that was a former Israeli soldier, and he spoke about his experiences, and that was brought by one of the student groups, and I believe I might get the name of the student group wrong, but it was, I believe, Students for Palestine. And the second event that second week was each group sort of had a rally. There was both a rally by the Students for Palestine group, and then there was a rally by a counter rally um, by a Jewish students group. So um, on the latter one, I got a very full report. The other one came up very quickly, and it was because it was so impromptu. Um, there was less of, frankly, of a rally or less of an event. But in the other two, look, I spoke personally with Chief Adams, Chief Johnny Adams, that used to be at USC and at UCLA, and you always have to prepare more, no matter what people that are prepared doing a protest say. It they may not control it all completely. Some people always want to surprise the administration, and you just have to be prepared for more rather than less. That's not to judge anything, but that's just my experience. And frankly, when we had protests a few years ago, and the board talked about it, we relied a little bit too much in the past on what sometimes the protesters tell us. And in this case, we said, look, given what we've seen at protests at other schools, other institutions across the country, let alone here in LA, we're not taking chances. And from what we got as a report, and I double checked some of those reports, and both Bob Myers, our campus counsel, and Johnny Adams, our chief of police, said that protesters afterwards took pictures with them and counter protesters. So um, We did it right. We engage with the students. I engage with students all the time, whether I agree with them or disagree with them, and I'm willing to tell them that I disagree with them. I think some of you have heard me disagree with you, and I've been willing to do that. I believe an honest disagreement beats a dishonest or uh, a phony pretend agreement. And maybe because I've been married, I can say that too. But we had a really positive experience, and it was positive in all the senses because it demonstrates that you can prepare and you can make things flow a little more smoothly, which isn't to say that UCLA or USC did everything wrong. I do think they did certain things wrong, but it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback. Um, I'm still not happy that the Denver Nuggets might not have played certain things right the other week, but them's the breaks. But I think we really were very cautious. We also have the benefit. One of our former trustees was the director of police communications at UCLA, and she awful, when we listened to some of her advice, and when the board is engaged, and we were very supportive of the police chief, he went and he bought a lot more of the sort of barricades that you need in this sort of situation, which we didn't own. We didn't have that many of the barricades. He said, I went out and bought 10 more barricades. I'll get reimbursed, but I made sure we bought them immediately so we could deploy them. He's not waiting for a bureaucratic answer and filing a lot of forms. He went out there and made sure that we had barricades to make sure that certain groups were kept a little bit separate so that they weren't always in each other's face, to reduce the chance of violence that we saw at UCLA. And I'm proud of that. I hope that was responsive to everything you were asking. And if I'm not, please let me know. I made a little joke to you, John, about dancing around questions, but sometimes I'll jump right in. You know that.
Yeah, of course. No, no, no. So in your assessment, it was a pretty successful protest event for that incident, for those couple of incidents.
I heard all three of them and I did check. I wanted to attend them, but I also felt like sometimes if a board member shows up, you can get sort of hijacked into supporting one group or the other. And that's not to say I don't have my opinions, and I'm happy to share them, and I've been happy to share them. But in the middle of the heat of the event, I'm not sure that the trustee's presence is always so helpful. So I had a lot of debate going back and forth, and ultimately I chose not to put it as a top priority to show up personally and to let staff delegate and deal with it. There were plenty of they also engaged a lot of our faculty, and as we've seen at the faculty, a lot of the institutions, whether it's Harvard or Columbia or Berkeley, we wanted our faculty to understand that we support students' right to protest whether or not we agree with it. We support their right to protest, whether we agree substantively. But um, um, the we also cannot tolerate students being intimidated physically or otherwise, and we can't allow our grounds. What the people of Santa Monica paid their capital amounts for to build. We're not going to have that destroyed either, which is some of the stuff that happened at USC and UCLA that we saw. And some of those were historic buildings. And I'd be really upset if that happened to our community.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear from some others. Sam, you're up.
Hey Rob.
Hi.
So I was impressed by your new director of the Bridges Academy, new board director. So what has that experience been like, and what have you learned from it? And then tying that to SMC, what is more to be desired in terms of accessibility for those who are neurodivergent?
So I'm impressed that you read it that carefully. But thankfully, I know it's in the first few pages, so that's good. But I'm in my first month. That being said, my kids have attended Bridges since one of them's a 12th grader and he's been attending since he was in sixth grade. So I have a 7-year association with Bridges Academy, which is a 2E school. 2E stands for twice exceptional. I'm not necessarily a fan of the self-aggrandizement of calling yourself twice exceptional. In my case, it's quite limiting because I could be 7 times exceptional, but who knows? I appreciate that that's the branding in a lot of the community. So when they say twice exceptional, what they mean is special needs, and then the second exceptionality is they would say gifted. I tend to prefer to say capable of above grade level work, because I'm much more committed to um, um, growth mindset. And I want to encourage students to work hard, not to say, well, I'm really smart or I'm gifted and therefore things are going to come easily to me, or I can wait till the end of the day. And by the way, I've run into some of that problem with my kid who had one of my children is autistic and one of my children has ADD of the non-attentive type, which is why I say ADD rather than ADHD, with some social anxiety and with a lot of social anxiety and with also some OCD. We're actually going to do some retesting because nowadays there's a more common, the DSM didn't used to let you diagnose autism and ADD, and now it does. And so we're going to retest because there could be some overlap there. There could really be both diagnoses. Anyway, what have I learned? So far, the learning is flowing a lot more the other way, because people, once you're on the board, people start saying, well, I'd like this changed and I'd like that changed and I'd like you to do this. And then they start giving me all these people that they want me to do an enormous amount of research. They wanted me to call some of the schools in Pasadena, some schools in San Diego. And I say, I think while I'm happy to learn, I'm a little leery of stepping on staff's toes by doing staff's research for them and starting to come up with recommendations. I can see that Patricia Hoffman's nodding a little bit because she knows the temptation is always to micromanage and to start trying to take control. And while here's my rule of thumb. When I do it, it's proper and appropriate oversight and educating myself. When another trustee does it, it's micromanagement. But precisely because I know each one of us believes that, I tend to give everyone a little bit of leeway. I tend to give them a lot of leeway. If they want to ask more questions and maybe it verges a little into micromanagement, they probably feel the same way about my questions. Heaven knows everyone felt that way about Keith Coleman's questions. So, I know, but I know he felt that they were very appropriate, I'm sure, because we all feel that way. And a little humility and empathy and understanding go a long way. Perhaps that's also what goes a lot of the way in some of the protests that we've had. All that being said, I'm trying to resist the temptations but we hired a new consultant because we've now put on a lot more parents onto the board at Bridges. And there was a period of time where they let the mission escape and they were in a growth mode of trying to start a Bridges Seattle, Bridges Online, Bridges Graduate School. And they started losing sight of how do we just educate the kids and how do we stick to our core mission and not try to do everything at once. Unlike the movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once. And we hired a governance consultant, and I actually reached out to the governance consultant was in town last week, but with all of the stuff going on with my kid graduating and in his last week of school, and I was trying to make sure that I picked him up every day because these are the last times I'm ever going to be able to pick my kid up from high school. I said I'll reach out to him and see if we can talk either Memorial Day or sometime before, because my first true full board meeting as a full-on director of Bridges is next week. But I want to get to your other question. There's a lot of lessons there that are sort of in there, and they actually are, I think, relevant to your endorsement decision. And I think that I think there are lessons for anyone that's trying to be an elected. And heaven knows that I've learned a lot of lessons of what I can and can't affect. And sometimes it's a long game. Sometimes you have to play the long game and be persistent. Half of life is showing up, the other half is not leaving. But the other part of your question was, what can Santa Monica College do? I think neurodiversity is having a moment. I think it will continue having a moment. I think our society is willing to now more carefully look at what people are capable of. And perhaps this is a paraphrase of Marx, but we are willing to accept from people what they can give and give to people what they can use. And a few years ago, my ex-wife said to me, I'm not sure that Dash is going to be able to go to four-year college. And I went and I checked with all the caregivers and all the people that had assessed my son. And to a person, they said, he's a freshman. It's too early to make that decision. He's going to grow, develop, and mature in ways you don't even understand yet in high school. And I went back to my ex-wife and I said, the experts seem to believe that we're making that decision too early. And the greatest thing my son Dashel has going for him to get to four-year college is our belief that he's going to attend. And He's going to be attending Berkeley now. And we didn't give up on him. We don't give up on any of the kids. And the reason I went into such detail on my son, because I'm not asking you to elect me Father of the Year. I'm willing to accept it, but I'm not asking for that election or that endorsement. But those are our kids at Santa Monica College. A lot of them weren't ready, and they needed some more time, or they needed another chance. And if there's anything that education does, it gives people those chances in life, and it helps them prepare. And they don't always know. And one of the things that I find so frustrating is because of the state budget crises, and it's going to be in crisis the rest of my life too. It's been in crisis. It will continue being in crisis. No matter what they learn, they're going to find out that the next budget cycle that they didn't learn this particular thing, and now they're $150 billion short this year. So it's always going to happen. So they push us to be more and more quote unquote efficient with students, and to make them declare majors the moment they will set foot on campus, before they set foot on campus electronically. And I'm always pushing. I say, I know, I understand it. We want people to progress through. We don't want them to spend 7 years trying to get 2 years of education. We don't want them taking misstep after misstep. But sometimes I think we throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think we don't let people explore enough. And my favorite part of college was when they gave us a shopping period, and you could enroll in like 7, 8, 10 classes all at once and take them for a couple of weeks, and then decide what you really were going to end up taking for the rest of the year. And if I'd have had to declare a major in my first week, my first day before I showed up on campus, it would have been ridiculous. It would have made no sense. The fact that my son has something that he tells me that he's enrolled for, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And to the extent, and I was saying to him today, Dash, I know that you're planning on doing East Asian studies at Berkeley, and that's a great major at Berkeley. But if you change your mind, there's no shame in that. And if you discover something about yourself when you take that class in statistics, and all of a sudden you decide that statistics is for you, which is not what he is talking about right now, I'm not standing in your way. And I want you to pursue that and discover a little bit more about it. Life isn't about finding yourself. It's about creating yourself. If anyone here knows who said that quote, I will give you $1, which is not meant to bribe you, but if it does work, then accept it as a bribe. Go right ahead. It's I believe it's George Bernard Shaw, and I tell people, stop looking out there and start figuring out how to discover who you are. And that comes from having a lot of experiences. The ability to change your mind is the greatest thing that you could have. And I'm always, as an executive, one of the things I say, what you try to learn is, what if I'm wrong, and how would I know it? What are the indicia that I would start seeing? Which again leads back to that humility I was talking about. What if I'm wrong? And I loved it when people that reported to me could convince me or change my mind. Patricia Hoffman and I used to have bets, and we would say to each other, you're one of the few people that actually can persuade me and get me to change my mind. And she did it for me a few times. I'd like to think I did it for her, but clearly not enough. I should probably stop there. I hope I answered the full question. And I know I delved into some other topics, but it's a deep question. And I'll say this, we spend so much time talking about budgets and talking about HR issues and talking about other things. We never spend enough time on the philosophy of education, because the philosophy of education is about how do you make people. And it's about me as a parent as well. Because I always say my job is to help my kid become who he or she is supposed to become. And I now have 2 he's, because my second son is a trans boy, and that seems to be the journey he's on. It wasn't the journey I predicted for him. It wasn't the journey I asked him for. But they didn't pick their parents, and I didn't pick my kids. I take them as they are, and my job is to help facilitate them becoming who they're supposed to be. And I feel that that's what SMC does for our students. I feel that very strongly.
Beautiful.
I'm done talking. If you couldn't
Yeah.
tell, I was done talking right there. That was my end statement. The applause can commence right now. Thank you.
Yeah, I was trying to give an appropriately moment to digest it.
I appreciate it.
Okay, let's go to Isabel next.
Thank you.
Rob. So yeah, you've talked about some of this, you know, and the outreach and the type of students who are especially benefiting from SMC, and I'm just so supportive of it. And they may, you know, need help in the initial stages. What about supporting them through the college experience? You know, I've looked at the completion rates and either for finishing a certificate or a degree or being able to transfer. What can we do to help these students through those years there so that so more of them are able to meet their goals?
I I I do. It will not surprise you to hear I have strong feelings on this. I believe that students succeed where they have a sense that people care whether they succeed or fail. And it doesn't always have to be one of their teachers, one of the professors. It doesn't have to be your coach. Doesn't have to be your guidance counselor. Doesn't have to be someone that processes and helps you file some of your forms. But all of those people can be within that category. The fact that someone cares whether you do well or don't do well at an institution is what is, I think, the biggest predictor of how well you of whether or not you succeed. So that's why we set up not just formal places where people can seek help, or that, and I'm always talking about, and this is my own phrase, and I don't know that counseling people are ever going to adopt it, but I use it a lot: intrusive counseling. Don't wait for the student to come to you. And especially with our students that sometimes haven't had a great history of knowing exactly what they need. You have to be, and as I say, intrusive. You have to look for the, again, just like if I'm wrong, the indicia that I'm not correct. What are the indicators that a student needs some help? Are their grades in the beginning of the class not doing well? And then can we get automatic notification to counselors and or to the professor so that they can start taking some action, so they can reach out and say, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? You seem to have had some problems with this type of assignment, but not this one. We have a lot of informal or socially based or category sort of based support systems, whether it's for African American students, for our Latino center, whether we have our equity center that has four different sort of focuses. Should I say foci? I'll be pretentious and say foci, and Michael can enjoy that. But you know, how do we help them? I suppose the clever answer is any way we can, and I've just tried to give a lot of the examples, and you can see this in the way I respond to things. There's never one answer, and that's why I say it has to be data driven, and a lot of small answers. Someone who's much more brilliant than I once said to me, and I guess my comment about intrusive counseling and that showing that somebody cares, and someone that asks you how you're doing, and someone that always checks in on you how you're doing. Someone that was on the school board once told me that she asked a principal about how they could help some of the students that hadn't done well. They were at Olympic High School and they hadn't done as well in academics as they hoped. And the principal says, some of these students needed more hugs. They needed more attention. They needed more caring.
Mm-hmm.
I always say that for my own kids, whatever the problem is, I'm going to give them more love. I'm going to love them even more. Now, that's a corny thing to say for an institution,
Mm-hmm.
but an institution shows its caring in different ways. And we give them even more resources, and we try to figure out more ways to do it. I think sometimes we have to be tougher on ourselves by saying, is this resource having the effect that we hoped? And you hear me writing about that because it is easy to start programs and tough to stop them if they're not working exactly the way you want. And sometimes I say that's the challenge, and people aren't going to like it when you want to cut their program because you don't see the results, and there's no way to measure that it's helping. And sometimes you're willing to give it more time to see if it'll help, and maybe give people more opportunities to say, hey, can you demonstrate that you're making a difference? And I've hated anecdotal evidence since Ronald Reagan talked about welfare queens, okay? And it's easy to say that in front of a Democratic club, but I've hated it ever since, because you can prove anything via anecdote, even when the anecdote's not true, and there aren't these people that are there aren't people that are declaring bankruptcy after having just had their medical school paid for by the state. You know, that just wasn't happening. But they use that as examples. And I feel that we do people a disservice when we're not tough on programs. And when we let it become a vanity program, or when we let it do it because it makes us feel good, because, oh, it's so great that we think that we're doing something. If it's not showing results, then it's taking away from other programs that might show results. And I want to be tough on programs. And I think that's what sometimes separates me. And I'm not afraid of people saying, you know, Rob, ruthless is not a kind word, but sometimes you have to be willing to say, this is what the evidence seems to be showing me. Prove me wrong. Did that answer enough of your question, Isabel? I mean, I'm happy to keep talking more. And we have one Margaret Quinones has been was a counselor, and I actually listened very carefully because she and I actually tend to be very close on a lot of the counseling issues. And she has a greater experience, but I think a lot of it boils down to some of those lessons that I'm trying to, abstract what the overall lesson, the overall takeaway is. And then how do you create those so-called serendipitous moments? At some schools, they can look at it and they're small enough. We're not small enough to actually say, how do we have someone that cares about this student and assign that person to spend more time? Because, small private schools can do that. Santa Monica College has, at this point around 23, 24, 25,000, depending. And if we're lucky, we'll get up to 26, 27,000. So we can't always plan it as much as we'd like. But I used to say when I did advanced work for Clinton, my job was to plan spontaneous events on the campaign trail. And so I always try to plan serendipity and spontaneity as much as you can, just so that you can have those things happen.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's go to Lynn now.
Hi, Rob. I'm really enjoying hearing you speak right now. It's very important and actually very emotional for me to hear you speak as you are. But I want to go on and mention that it was really fun reading that you studied with Cory Booker and that you were a student of Professor Elizabeth Warren, and that you coordinated President Clinton's train trip to the Democratic National Convention. I love reading about that. So congratulations.
That is the best time anyone has ever said "but" to me in a sentence. I really enjoyed hearing you, but that is not where I expected you to go. So if you could stop there, I'd be so grateful.
No, it's all good. It's all good. This is totally a different subject that I'm going to ask you about. You mentioned very briefly AI capabilities. And I'm wondering, how do you envision any new AI capabilities affecting instruction and learning in the future at the college?
I've been talking about online learning and the fact that we needed to reduce our footprint in terms of physical plant. And we are de-densifying, even though we are upgrading a lot of the facilities, and that's what we're doing with the money. We're getting rid finally of the portables, and those, to have portables in a city like Santa Monica is embarrassing. But one of the things we're trying to do is shift some of it, and obviously pandemic shifted it for us, so that we could address students' needs in different ways. And you asked your question in a certain point, not you, but the club asked its question in a pointed way. And I said, I reject false dichotomies, but I'm going to answer your question anyway. And of course, the answer was yes. Is it A or B? It's yes. And some students are going to do better, and most students need something in person at some point. But a lot of students want to go at their own pace and learn certain things on their own. And I wonder what I would have done had I had the ability to take certain classes online. And the first thing I do whenever I had to help my kids with learning, I was on Khan Academy in a second and a half. I mean, they didn't even teach synthetic division with polynomials when I was in high school. They didn't teach synthetic division. I didn't know what synthetic division. I had no idea what that was. But I taught myself synthetic division because I took all the lectures on Khan Academy. So there was something that I learned, and I clearly was the first trustee that really I came up as an interactive video game attorney. And so I'm a digital native in terms of my career. And I think people have different teaching styles. They have different subject matters. People have different learning styles. People that have sat next to me at meetings know that I sometimes learn more best by being able to talk it through and to comment on something or to engage with it. Some people can literally listen to lecture after lecture and be stone cold silent. That's a challenge for me. And that might be my ADD. That might be my ADHD and my fidgetiness. So I think AI is going to open up, and again, this is sort of like artist theory. There's the art that's actually created. There's the artist, what he or she intended to create. And then there's the audience and how they experience it and what they bring to the experience. The same thing is true of our students and our learning experience. There's the education and the material that's taught. There's the teacher, and then there's the student. And those three variables, you can understand why the holy grail of differentiating education is so difficult to achieve. How do you do that in a class of 30 students and change your teaching style, which you may have a native teaching style, to try to reach that student that has a different learning style than you're used to on different material? I think AI is going to help teachers focus on what they do best ultimately. And look, I am very fearful of what AI is going to have in terms of our workforce. And I do think that there are very legitimate questions to talk about in terms of universal wages and universal income. But to the extent that AI frees people and help students achieve getting what they need, and if they can, just like you might take a personality test, and most personality tests are utter hokum, by the way. They have absolutely no research basis behind them, but the big four and big five typically have some basis behind them, and they have some legitimacy, and people do have different learning styles. And of course, some of the data strongly indicate that doing multiple ways, like both lecture and something visual, and or something where they can speak and do an oral presentation, and or where they might have some moving video, something film, when you can repeat it and do it and highlight it in multiple ways, having multiple ways of letting people engage with material tends to be better than having a single way, because you're triggering different areas of the brain. Now, I said, well, heck, I know that. I've been a comic book reader my whole life, and I love reading now nonfiction comic books. By the way, John, that's how I helped teach my kids to read. I used a spoonful of sugar because I would take them to the comic book store all the time. So there's my secret weapon in terms of teaching my kids. And my kids all ended up reading comic books, and then they had a love of learning. And I say, if my kids are going to be addicted to something, I'd rather that they always know they're going to get a book or a comic book at whatever store we go to. And if that's the addiction I have to deal with, I'll suffer.
I teach my kids that if they're really good, they can listen to Rob Rader give his interview to the Democratic Club.
Well, he must have been a very good boy. I'm not sure I fully answered your question about AI, but I do think that I'm at Sky Zone and I worry about Skynet for all you Terminator people out there that appreciate the references. But to the extent that I, as an attorney, have fewer documents to review for due diligence or for discovery, I imagine that I will enjoy that.
Yeah.
And just like students now have a calculator that they can carry around, I still do a lot of my check balancing and a lot of that stuff I do it by hand or I do it in my head. I like to do it to keep myself sharp and in practice. But it's drudgery, and I don't expect people to want to do things without a calculator, and without being able to do certain things. Look, you could do all your geometry with a protractor and with a compass. but a lot of it can be easier if you have a program that kind of helps you do it once you've learned the basics, and that you have an essential understanding. So I'm leery of our tools, but I think it would be foolish to not engage with our tools and figure out where they worked best and what students they can help most. And some students it's not going to help as most, and they're going to need it. Look, I was a tutor in high school. I was always a tutor, and I used to work with some of the students, and they needed it to be explained multiple ways, and they needed to be at least figuratively handheld, and that's okay. And some people may get it, or may be able to do it off of a computer, and it may not be the students you suspect. You can always be surprised by who responds better, and who might have and they talk again, because I came up as a video game attorney. I'm used to the notion of gamification, because we didn't have to gamify a game. It was already a game, but learning is supposed to be fun. And I am always happy to get lost and drive around corners that I haven't seen. And some of that metaphorically is what learning is. It's driving around that corner to learn what you haven't seen, or what you didn't know yet. I hope that answers it. And by the way, if you have thoughts on it, I'd probably benefit more from hearing your point of view.
Thank you.
Or have Stanford X answer all the questions, and Keith can just tell me what the answer was that I didn't say.
Okay, let's go to Mike.
Hey, Rob. So it looks like in partnership with a four-year institution that we may finally be getting some student housing at Santa Monica College on the land that's owned and just across the border in LA. I have a two-part question, although hopefully it's can be short, relatively short answer. Who do you see the portion that goes to Santa Monica College serving? What group of students or groups of students? And secondly, what role do you see Santa Monica College having in pressing the four-year institution about who they ought to be serving with the portion that they're building on the college's land?
So the first thing I'd like to note is that I'm really proud of the fact that we got UCLA engaged, and this is one of those examples that relates to the earlier question, because as a trustee, a lot of that is staff driven. Most of it is staff driven. I don't build buildings. I don't do designs for buildings. I help set policy and budgets, and I'm one of 7 people that vote on it and engage with the others in that, and engage in that public process to hear people's comments and thoughts on it. But I wasn't satisfied with how we were progressing. I was very dissatisfied. And in fact, people knew that I wasn't happy with what the consultant presented. I fought about some of those, what the consultant presented in public. I found errors in some of their calculations, and we had to pull back some of what we filed at one point, or were filing, because they were filing some of the wrong stuff. And I was the trustee that caught it, because I was reviewing it very carefully. And some of you that have served with me on audit or finance committees know that I want to be a numbers person, because the moment you don't understand the numbers, somebody understands the numbers, and they're gonna understand the numbers to your detriment if you don't understand the numbers. So I wasn't happy, and I reached out actually to the consultant that we used to have at downtown Santa Monica and told him some of my unhappiness. He says, this is something UCLA should be more excited about. And we talked about it, and he says, would it be okay if I reached out to UCLA? And I said, everything I have shared with you and all the documents I've shown you are public documents, and I would be very happy if you shared it with them. And that is how we ended up with UCLA, because our consultant formerly at downtown Santa Monica that I'd worked very closely with reached out to UCLA, and literally the day that he had finished Zooming and had phone calls with UCLA, they reached out to the college. So I'm very happy, because UCLA being involved is a home run for us. Michael, okay. I've already failed your request that it be short, but at least let me get to the 2 parts you asked. Part one.
That's not what I'm smiling at. Someone else suggested we call it a four-year institution. That's all I'm smiling at.
Okay. As far as telling UCLA has its vision of what it wants to do, and it has been doubling down, as you can see what it's doing with the old mall. on Pico Boulevard, but they build buildings and they complete buildings, and they are moving forward. They do move forward. They've
So just to
shared
be
some of their
clear,
tenants.
Rob, I'm focused on which groups of students
Okay,
are going to
so
be
that's
served.
the second part. Right.
Thanks.
So the home run
By
for me is
either
that our
institution.
right that our students are going to be exposed to their students by living in close proximity. Because much like I said about visiting Santa Monica College, and that's why I try to get students at SMMUSD to visit Santa Monica College, is because it makes college real and it helps them see that future life for themselves. And for them to see a future life for themselves at UCLA, UCLA has said that they want both graduate and I think and undergraduate housing at Santa Monica College. And that's interesting. I've only heard that once, and the conversation only started in December, January, and they're following up, and we're starting to try to work on some very large conceptual designs with UCLA. But I think it's very open as to what they're trying to pick right now.
And are we
Two, what is Santa
what
Monica College?
income groups of students, what needs? That's what I'm really most focused on, to
Got
be
it.
honest.
So we have always talked about having a large component that were in the affordable category, housing category. And we've talked especially about students that were foster children and or had other obstacles they've overcome, have the opportunity to have housing. So the housing challenge, and to address the housing challenges that our students face, to have a large component of affordable housing. However, I am not sure what the numbers are going to pencil out to be, because the state doesn't give us any money for affordable housing for students. While they are willing to pay a little bit of seed money for making the building, the capital cost, there is no money for operations. And we have to be very careful that Santa Monica College is a lifeboat. It can save people. But if you try to have it do too much, you could end up sinking the lifeboat. And we need to make sure that we are not subsidizing all the housing because we have no additional money to subsidize. We already have a structural deficit that is approaching 8 figures. And we will have blown through almost all of the pandemic money in the next year and a half. There will be almost no reserve left. We need to make some tough choices. So my goal is to have as much affordable housing as possible, but we also need to make sure that the affordable housing we provide doesn't impair the education we provide to all of our students. That's not an exact answer, but I don't know that we can give you an exact answer yet. And I think I'd be just shining you on to give you some kind of number that, oh, it's going to be 80%. I don't think that anyone, I don't think anyone can do that now. And I don't want to insult you by trying to do that.
No, I appreciate that. And offline, we probably ought to talk more about whether, if it takes some more money to make that happen, whether we ought to go to the voters and ask for it.
Okay. I'm happy to have, if it's not apparent in this interview that I like to talk, then I don't know what we've achieved today. So I'm happy to talk about it. There you go.
That much you've convinced us for sure. Let's go to Keith for the last question.
I almost made it through the
Rob.
whole thing without Keith. I almost made it out through the whole thing. I said, God, if Keith and Natalia can keep at bay, then I'm going to do okay.
Oh my goodness. There you go. Well, I love that bridge back there. Reminds me of the old days.
Right.
So I wasn't going to really talk about budget, but Mike kind of brought that up related to housing, and then you brought it up as well in terms of the structural deficit inside of your questionnaire. I have another question, but one thing to just throw out there, because of the nature of funding for community colleges, potential future review, not just looking at reserves, but looking at the concept of endowments, because those are usually, set for four-year universities, not for community colleges. So that's something to think about moving forward. But my other question really is related to all the amazing things that are happening at SMC. You spoke of the cloud computing. There was a question about AI. Clearly there's been movement on campus with the new BCAP program for Blue Economy and Climate Action Pathways. And I think you and I had a quick conversation about green jobs of the future. The question becomes, how are all students really going to avail themselves of these opportunities? Because sometimes what can happen in certain scenarios is that certain student and populations get a chance to explore, dive in, and discover these kinds of amazing pieces of curriculum, and others do not. So I'm curious. Do you have any thoughts on how all students really have a good shot at exploring these fantastic opportunities at SMC that are coming forward?
It's funny. Can you hear me? I just want to make sure you can. Yeah. I wanted to make sure I cited it correctly, but while you were talking, yes, it's a great question because you're getting at the point of, do the rich get richer? Do the people that need it the least get the most? You're right. And one of the first questions I ever asked at Santa Monica College is, are we simply creaming students from all over the county to get to transfer? And we looked at the data, and if anyone remembers Jose that used to be on the school board, he looked at the data with me at one point, and we sort of agreed that it was more than just us skimming the cream. And that's important, that we are actually value added in getting students to college that otherwise wouldn't have gone, or that needed that extra help, and that weren't the ones that you most likely predicted were going to be that. And we are, as I noted, the #1 feeder, not just to the UC system, but the #1 for African Americans and the #1 for Latinos to the UC system across the state. Okay, so there's some certain gross numbers, but then, what are we doing? The program I think that just comes to my mind most quickly is not just the Young Scholars Program, which is a joint venture with the school district, which you probably know. And I used to go to the graduation or the ceremony every year because it's very moving. But we have a program called STEM MOS, STEM More. So to make sure that the benefits of STEM education, and sometimes people call it STEAM when they want to add in art, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, but to make sure that STEM is shared. We are an Hispanic serving institution, which means that more than 30% of our students are Latino. And we wanted to make sure that all of our students, including the fact that we are an Hispanic serving institution, are able to all benefit from our signature programs in STEM. That we have a great partnership with JPL. I think that's me buzzing. Let me see if I can turn that off. Did that work? Yep, I think that worked.
Our STEM MOS program and see that we and look, it's easy again to talk about when we look at our data, African American men are not doing well. And we've done a lot to help with minority men of color and have our programs and to have people that come in. And we did an inventory with them. We had them come in. We had a group come in, the Minority Men of Color Action Network, and they looked at our campus and they polled a lot of the students to see where we were doing a good job and where we were not doing a good job. And there's no such thing as being. You're always in a state of becoming. And it's very easy to kind of get very critical and say, well, we aren't doing enough. One of the things that turns out that I always felt that we weren't doing enough of, and we are doing more and more of it, is to get, again, more growth mindset, to get more grit. And I understand some people feel that grit can end up creating more of a deficit mindset or labeling some students that they aren't showing enough grit. But that's not the spirit in which, I'm blanking on the professor's name of grit. That's not what she's intending. Duckworth, Professor Duckworth. That's not what she's intending when she promotes grit.
No,
she's trying to say that these non-cognitive and non-academic factors are often what help predict students, because you will always have failures. It's not whether you fall down, it's whether you pick yourself up. And we want students to understand that when they fall down, That's okay. And one of the things I do for my students and for my kids, and I've clearly done it for myself, is give yourself permission to fail. Because if you're not failing, you're not trying new things and not doing more and not stretching yourself. And that's what we want to do for our students. And so as you can see, we look at all these different dimensions. We're looking at our Emoja Center. We are looking at STEM Moss. We are trying to intervene and do what I call intrusive counseling, and we have a lot more alarm bells that go off when a student isn't doing well in the first half of the class or when they're not making progress towards their degree. So we have technological and ways to address it. I put together, I think, a list in my of different sorts of interventions you can do. And then that's why I say you have to then measure which ones can we measure and see which ones are doing the best job, and put more resources in the ones that are actually making the most difference in for our students. And if it's because we do more classes at times for working parents, then let's do that. And if it's because we have more counselors that are focused on veterans, then let's do that. At some level, I want to be agnostic because I want to do whatever works. And as I said, there's never going to be one. If there's one solution, I'll eat the hat I'm not wearing, because that just doesn't seem very likely to me. It's going to be a lot of solutions. Again, I always keep asking, am I addressing a lot of the points of your question? But I'm trying to be really, so I mentioned Young Scholars, STEM Moss, Emoja.
Yeah. And it was just,
I can't quite hear you. Maybe, I may have turned off my, oh, there it is.
Yeah, I was just curious about your kind of to again speak to Professor Dweck, your kind of growth mindset on that in terms of how that works in the policy delivery kind of a way. That was the nature of that question, and I hear you loud and clear on Duckworth. She was my professor back at Penn. She's an amazing person. So
how come you never mention that? What next time I want you to?
It doesn't matter.
Maybe
but,
you'll crash Michael's meeting with me, and we can talk about Duckworth, because I'm very curious to hear that. And look, when I used to sit next to Cory Booker, it was more about us going to a party together than it was about the classes we took together. But he was in sociology, and that was at your favorite school. That would be Stanford, or maybe it's still Penn. I don't know. I thought it was Stanford. I'm very crushed if it's true that it's Stanford.
Okay.
That it's not Stanford. I'll be crushed.
All right. Well, thanks. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, Rob. I think it's safe to say that's all the time we have, and we look forward to having you on Wednesday, and that debate will be timed answers. So,
okay.
Yeah,
that is my son's graduation, so I'll be coming in hopefully after 7 o'clock,
yep.
and we'll see how that goes. So a little bit by ear, just because it's supposed to be from 5 to 7, but I have never seen an event that they do on time, no matter how much I've tried to time them. But there you go.
Well, good luck at the graduation. I hope it goes really well, and we'll see you afterwards to celebrate.
Thanks, everyone. I know it's a long day for you. Take care.
All right. Thanks.
Bye-bye.